Nerds, I'm Tom, and today we're going to talk about one of my favorite games, Summoner Wars 2nd Edition. Now, obviously, right off the bat, you already know I love this game. I loved it since the 1st edition. I actually have pretty much everything for the 1st edition. I've played like every single deck a bunch, and I'm really glad and happy to see that this game is sort of getting new life. So obviously, I'm going to talk about the game in general, say why I like it so much, and then do a slight brief comparison with the first one and let you know, should you get the 2nd edition or should you try and dig up the 1st edition? And I mean, ultimately, you should just get the 2nd edition. I mean, if you can find the 1st edition at a really good price for like somebody selling their whole collection or something, I mean, sure, go ahead and get that.
I'd buy that for $1.
But I'm actually pretty happy with some of the changes that they made for this edition. Now, if you don't know anything about Summoner Wars, it's a head-to-head card combat game. It's 1v1. There was a multiplayer variant in the 1st edition that they haven't really talked about in this edition at all, which I'm kind of glad because I really didn't like the multiplayer variant very much. But this is sort of a mix between chess and Magic the Gathering, or maybe some people have said Magic the Gathering and like a miniatures game, because it's ultimately you want to kill the other player's summoners. Kind of like a king, you have a big card that summons other units around the board, and you're moving around the board to try and attack the other player's units, and then ultimately kill the other player's summoner. Now, every turn you're going to be playing cards which are mostly units that are going to be summoned by these gate cards. You also have events in your deck, but that's mostly it. You have units and events, and there's a couple champion units that are like real big baddies, and then you have a bunch of common units, and then you're going to move them around the board in sort of chess-like fashion. I mean, they mostly all can only move 2 spaces, but some of them can move a little faster and move through other cards and stuff, because, pretty much every unit type has a different special ability. You're going to be rolling dice to attack. You have ranged attacks or melee attacks, and some cards have better stats than others and can roll more dice. Some cards can help buff other cards to let you roll more dice, let you re-roll, or give you some special abilities if you roll a certain little symbol on the die. One really cool aspect is when you're fighting, whenever you kill something, it actually adds to your magic, your mana, the money that you spend in the game. You can also discard cards to increase the money that you gain too, but I think that's a really cool aspect. So you don't have to worry about any sort of economy cards in the deck. You just go out and fight, or discard cards to get the money that you need. And that's mostly it for a brief overview of how the game works. It's very simple and straightforward. It takes like less than 10 minutes to teach, and it's really fun. Everybody can jump right into it. And one of the big selling points about that is that you actually have tons of different decks, different factions. In the base set, you have 6 different factions, which are all essentially reprints and reworkings of factions that were in the original edition. But it's pretty cool that you get to pick whichever faction you want. You get a pre-made deck, and then you just sit down and you have different sort of matchups, the Savannah Elves versus the Benders, or Breakers, I think they are in this one. The Vanguards versus the Fallen Kingdom. The Polar Dwarves versus the Cave Goblins, and you get to try out all these different abilities in the decks and how they match up with the other decks. And it is, while it's easy to teach, and you can jump right into it, your first game with any new deck, with any new faction, is going to be sort of a learning game. I mean, you can sit there and read every single card prior to playing, but that still doesn't really help you. It's best to like play the cards and really see them in action and see exactly where the value is. Okay, I guess it would make a lot of sense to play this card first, and then that would buff this guy, and if I move this guy out of the way of that guy, then this guy would have straight line of sight to hit this dude, So there is a slight learning curve, like not with the rules so much, but with the strategy and all the different abilities. So even though there are 6 different decks, you still feel like you're probably going to play the game like at least 12 times before you like are really good at every single deck and know all the stuff that you need to know, which is, I think, is really great. I mean, it's cool to just jump right in and have a good game, with the first time playing your deck, and then the second or third or fourth time you play that faction, you feel like you're like more of an expert with that faction, which, I mean, again, I can't praise this game highly enough, so everything I say is just going to sound like I'm just gushing over the game, but I kind of am. Now, in terms of differences from the 1st edition, they are extremely similar. There's like maybe 10% worth of difference. Probably the biggest difference would be within the decks themselves, and I'm not an expert on the 1st edition of Summoner Wars, so I can't tell you, oh, well, this character used to have 3 strength and now it has 2 strength, or whatever, I mean, it's little tweaks like that to refine it, but overall, in terms of the base game rules, there's just a couple minor tweaks. You used to be able to play a gate card from your deck. I mean, I guess that's the only other type of card. You have a couple gate cards where you can summon things around it, but it's, okay, so it's units, events, and then gate cards. Sure, so technically 3 types of cards. But you used to be able to summon a gate like right against the edge of your half of the board so that you could summon somebody onto basically your opponent's side of the board, and now you can't do that. And actually, they weren't called gates before, they were called walls. And I guess gate is a bit more thematic. You used to just have regular d6s that you rolled, and now you have these custom die, which is way cooler. I mean, it looks a lot nicer, but it also affects the gameplay because now there's more of a difference between ranged and melee attacks. And there's a little special symbol on some of the sides of the die that does nothing unless a card specifically says if you roll this, you get a bonus. And also the cards are slightly bigger. They're more standard size cards in the second edition. They're regular Magic the Gathering size cards, which is great because I actually had to go get special Summoner Wars sleeves for the first edition, and with this edition I can just use my regular Ultra Pro matte clears that I use for everything, so that's really convenient. The only possible negative for the second edition is, in my opinion, the art a little bit. Like, I liked the art in the first edition a bit more. It was a bit more realistic, a bit more like serious and mature in a weird way. And this is just ever so slightly cartoony. Like, it really isn't. Like, I still enjoy this art. It isn't so cartoony to the point where it kind of turns me off. Like Marvel United was kind of that way, where it was so kind of chibi artwork that I was kind of like, oh, what? I don't like this. But this artwork is still I'm still totally fine with it, but overall I just liked the first edition artwork a bit more, but I think it was a bit almost too dark, and some of the images for some of the factions were gruesome almost in a way, so I kind of understand why they changed the artwork. So, I mean, I can take that with kind of a grain of salt. Like, it's really the only potential negative that I have. So, I mean, a game, nothing's perfect, so that makes this game, like a 9.8 out of 10, So overall, obviously, I can't recommend this game enough. I love it. It's fantastic. I really think you should get the second edition just because first edition stuff is hard to find. Like, again, unless you can find, like, somebody selling their whole collection, sure, that'd be great. But the second edition, and more so because they are going to come out with new decks. Not only are they going to be reprinting, the old factions and with tweaks and stuff, they are going to be adding new factions. So I'm really excited to see that because, I haven't seen new factions in this game for a couple of years now. So hell yeah. So I'm going to put a purchase link for Summoner Wars 2nd Edition in the description box down below. I highly recommend you get yourself a copy. Also down there is going to be a link for Game Toppers. They're the sponsor for Neverboard Gaming. We love them. And also there's going to be a button that says subscribe, because if you subscribe to our channel, then you will never be bored. Boom.